Welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eunjung Cho. North Korea says it has successfully launched its first spy satellite. South Korea responded by suspending part of an inter-Korean military agreement and increasing military surveillance along the border. Today, we discuss the latest security situation on the Korean Peninsula.
군사 분계선 일대에서 북한의 도발 징후에 대한 공중 감시 정찰 활동을 복원할 것입니다.
I can say that we condemn the DPRK's unlawful launch of a military reconnaissance satellite.
In the studio with me, Mr. Richard Lawless, founding principal of NMV Consulting. Mr. Lawless was former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Asian and Pacific Security Affairs and also served as Deputy Head of the U.S. delegation to the Beijing Six-Party Talks. Mr. Lawless has also spent 15 years as a clandestine services officer in the Central Intelligence Agency, where he specialized in nuclear proliferation issues. His recently published book, Hunting Nukes, addresses both South Korea and North Korea's nuclear programs. Also joining us, Mr. Sidney Seiler, Senior Advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Mr. Seiler was former National Intelligence Officer for North Korea on the National Intelligence Council until July of this year. Mr. Seiler was the Special Envoy for Six-Party Talks, the National Security Council Korea Director during the Obama administration. Mr. Seiler also served as a Senior Analyst for U.S. Forces Korea. Mr. Seiler has worked on North Korea issues for over 40 years. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Seiler, the South Korean military said North Korea's spy satellite has entered into orbit. Malli경-1, we need to wait and see if it's operational, but the successful launch of a spy satellite, how does that change the security situation on the Korean Peninsula?
Eunjung, I think on the one hand, it's a troubling development. Yet on the other hand, it's not really particularly a transformational advance. North Korea, in terms of its nuclear capabilities and its evolving nuclear doctrine and what it said about how it would use its weapons, have pointed to targets in the United States, in Guam, and South Korea, targets about which it's relatively easy to know sufficient location, importance, et cetera, to begin the targeting process. But it is clear that once they get this capability, once it's fully developed and proven, it's one thing to put a satellite into orbit. It's another thing to be able to have real-time operational use of that for specific reconnaissance purposes. They hope to one day have this ability so that they can execute battle damage assessment, a key element of when you take a nuclear weapon and you hit a target, to be able to assess the type of damage in real time. These are troubling advances that remind us of the continued advance of the program, but they're not radical changers of the situation on the ground, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Lawless, though, isn't this a start of being a game changer? Because Kim Jong-un ordered his officials to put many spy satellites into the orbit by 2026. And if it has many spy satellites to monitor US, South Korea, and Japan's military activities real time, wouldn't US and South Korea also need to change their military strategy against North Korea?
Probably yes. The interesting thing is that the North Korean regime wants to demonstrate to the world, not just to South Korea, not just to Japan, of course to the United States, that it is a near-peer nuclear strategic weapon state. To do that, they almost have to have the ability to have real-time reconnaissance satellites above the Republic of Korea. But remember, they'll also be monitoring and use these to monitor bases beyond the Republic of Korea. For example, our bases in Japan, our base in Guam. Where's the nuclear retaliation against North Korea going to come from? It'll come from Guam. It'll come from Kadena in Japan. So as part of a comprehensive nuclear war fighting capability, the North Koreans aspire to have this. And so they'll probably continue to press on until they have that capability.
So how should the military strategy against North Korea change then? Should United States redeploy tactical nuclear weapons there to the South Korea?
In my mind, it should be a continuing priority consideration. I actually believe the answer to that question is yes. And to that point, as you're aware, RAND Corporation recently released a report, and which it took some time to work with Asan Institute in Korea. Option 7 suggests almost an approach that we took to the NATO countries, where we wanted to provide tangible nuclear reassurance, but yet we did not want, and at the same time we wanted to dissuade certain NATO countries, namely Germany, from developing their own nuclear weapons capability. So what we did was begin phasing in a nuclear weapons capability. Option 7 in the RAND Asan report very carefully advances a 4-stage program that would actually see the Republic of Korea financing the repurposing of existing U.S. nuclear weapons, modernizing them, and also preparing to the support and bunkering requirements in the Republic of Korea that would allow us to, in a crisis situation, deploy or advance deploy those tactical nuclear weapons to the Republic of Korea. So it's actually a very interesting proposal on the part of Asan Ryan.
Mr. Seiler, I've talked to experts the past couple of years about the redeployment of tactical nuclear weapon issue, and majority of people were against that idea in the United States.
Well, this is obviously a topic where there's a lot of different opinions, a lot of different advocates for certain paths. And the argument, I think, for ROK either getting its own nuclear capability or returning U.S. tactical nuclear weapons to the peninsula, or moving towards other areas in which reassurance could be provided to the South Korean people. This is the time we need to be discussing these, because as you can see, the North Korea threat is growing. At the same time, the North Korea threat is being adequately today deterred, and the South Korean people are being adequately reassured. And I think going forward, this will be a key element of our U.S. ROK approach to this issue. Everybody knows the U.S. capabilities are there and available to come to the defense of the Republic of Korea. The performance of those capabilities are without question. The inventory that we have is without question. Where their best deployment is in peacetime, whether on U.S. soil or Korean soil, is something else for debate. But what is crucial part of deterrence, and I say this over and over again, is that the DPRK sees a tight U.S. ROK alliance that brings the intent credibility to our articulated deterrence strategy, so that Kim Jong-un knows that weaknesses in the alliance or debates about how to handle the threat aren't diminishing our readiness or diminishing our commitment to acting in response to whatever actions Kim has planned in the future.
So, Mr. Lawless, those tactical nuclear weapons that were deployed on the Korean Peninsula decades ago, those weapons are phased out.
Of course.
So if the weapons were to be restationed in Korea, wouldn't it be a new type of tactical nuclear weapon?
Yes and no. We do have certain weapons that could be used tactically, because these weapons have the ability to be set in terms of what their yield is in terms of whether they're tactical or non-tactical. However, we are in the process of developing a new class of medium-range missiles that probably would be exceptionally well suited to be deployed in the Far East. And I think there's actually a lot of discussion about redeploying this new family of tactical nuclear weapons and delivery systems in Europe, as well as in the Far East, perhaps in Guam, perhaps other places. So I think and I'm going to refer back to the RAND Institute because it's sort of a RAND Asan report. It's sort of a novel idea. And that is, we build the nuclear bunkers that we have throughout Europe, and we have weapons that are actually dedicated to the defense of Korea in the United States, paid for by the Republic of Korea. And then at some point, if we need to deter North Korea, we introduce those tactical nuclear weapons, or some of them, back into the Republic of Korea. The issue here is we must maintain, as Sid said, in the mind of the North Koreans, a peer, at least minimal peer nuclear assurance vis-a-vis North Korea. Whatever it takes for North Korea to recognize that threat is credible, we need to meet that.
The peer nuclear competitor for United States would be first Russia and then China. If United States were to redeploy nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula, wouldn't United States also have China in mind?
Of course.
Mr. Seiler.
Yeah, and that leads to the question of what type of instability that might introduce should China, in response, apply economic, political, diplomatic pressure on the ROK, and how do we manage that? That is a lesson, I think, in how not to manage it.
Yes.
There was a lot of fumbling and mistakes along the way on that. We would have to do it smartly.
So, Mr. Lawless, the tactical nuclear weapons stationed in South Korea that would target China and having South Korea fund that effort, wouldn't that be diplomatically very sensitive for South Korea? Would that be even feasible?
Oh, I'm not suggesting that. I'm not suggesting that at all.
But you said if those nuclear weapons could be targeting China as well, and you said, of course.
No, I'm saying, let's correct the record here. What I was saying was, I think China would regard, just as Russia would, the presence, as they have in the past, of nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons stationed in the ROK as a threat to them. How we would reassure others. The Chinese don't want to go to war again over North Korea, over the Korean Peninsula, that's for sure. How we reassure others in the region, to include Japan, to include China, and to include Russia, that we're targeting North Korea in terms of dissuading them from a nuclear exchange. I'm not advocating we do that tomorrow. I'm only advocating that we look at options that would eventually allow us to do that if the North Korean threat continues to evolve.
You know, and the language we used leading to the THAAD deployment and our engagement with the Chinese essentially was North Korea's refusal to credibly engage in negotiations towards denuclearization are creating a strategic provocation and challenge to which we must respond. And the ways in which we respond inevitably will be detrimental to China's interests. And if you don't like that, and if you want to act in your claimed desire for stability in the region and your known desire to advance your interests, then you need to bring North Korea to the table. You need to bring North Korea under control. These deployments, whether it was THAAD then or tactical nuclear weapons at some point in the future, are all coming in response to North Korea's behavior that China has failed over the years to deter.
Mm-hmm.
And the THAAD issue, the Moon Jae-in government sent Foreign Minister Kang to Beijing to assuage the Chinese on the THAAD, and she offered the Chinese 4 no's, which they quickly accepted. One of the 4 no's was, of course, there will be no additional deployment of THAAD. There will be, but more importantly, there will be no missile defense sharing with Japan and the United States to create a trilateral ballistic missile defense system. What we have now is, in effect, the first stage of a trilateral ballistic missile defense system. Have you heard anything from China about this? No, because China knows it's a done deal. So this is very interesting to watch in the context of the original THAAD problem.
Correct, and in the early days of THAAD, too, we had a relative, I know the Chinese will deny this retrospectively, but kind of an understanding that the growth of the missile program warranted this deployment. As time went on and they probed, any divisions between the U.S. and Iraq on it, and they began to emerge, they certainly exploited it. And so here we are, hundreds of missile launches later. It's hard to deny.
Now I want to look at the DPRK-Russia nexus. Now, Mr. Seiler, Russia has suddenly become an important player in Korean affairs. And after South Korea partially suspended the comprehensive military agreement, Russia's foreign ministry spokesperson warned against South Korea to be careful that South Korea's retaliation would only make the situation worse. Now, South Korea is a sovereign country. Is Russia telling South Korea to give up its right of self-defense? Wouldn't that be very insulting? And in 1983, Russia shot down South Korea's passenger airline, and South Korea didn't do much at the time. Now South Korea is a more influential country diplomatically, militarily, and economically. Isn't South Korea in a position where it can pay back to Russia for its insulting actions?
I don't know if payback is necessarily the right word, and I can't. I express no surprise that this is the type of reaction that we would see out of Moscow. It's similar language we often see out of Beijing when there's an escalation of tensions on the peninsula, and the PRC comes out with a "Please remain calm," true to their PRC acronym. Call to parties, knowing that Pyongyang's behavior is relatively hard to deter, and they have little influence to prevent Kim from doing things, shifting the blame to the United States, shifting the blame to the Republic of Korea, and urging calm and restraint on our side is not surprising. I wouldn't make too much out of that. The Moscow and Beijing are fully aware of the dynamics of the situation on the ground here. North Korea's continued actions in defiance of Security Council resolutions and the true cause of the problem in the region. And I think, the Republic of Korea, particularly under President Yoon, has shown more confidence on the international stage, particularly in the way it handles relations with China and Russia. And I think that the current Yoon team, will not stand up to Russia, but will be willing to speak boldly and ask Moscow to kind of take a more reasonable position in regards to North Korea's provocative actions.
Mr. Seiler, so South Korea has partially suspended the CMA, and South Korean government says that this was the bare minimum defense action because North Korea was the one that first breached the CMA and then now launched the spy satellite that could enhance its aerial surveillance capabilities, whereas the opposition party criticizes the South Korean government for putting South Korea's security at risk. Which side makes more sense to you?
You need to look at the comprehensive military agreement within the strategic context of North Korea's overarching goal, which we captured in both the annual threat assessment testimony of the Director of National Intelligence, as well as our National Intelligence Estimate on North Korean nuclear scenarios we released earlier in the year. Their overarching goal at this time is to achieve dominance on the peninsula over the Republic of Korea. And so when you see that strategic goal, then the diplomacy that was engaged in during the Charm Offensive has to be seen within the context of how that advances North Korea's dominance on the peninsula. And the way it does is it takes some interesting, historic, unprecedented perhaps, but relatively minor in retrospect, tactical adjustments to forces on the ground. Well, the long-range artillery, the missiles, and the growth in the nuclear arsenal go relatively unaddressed. The most charitable characterization of the CMA I can think of is to see it as a test of what some initial confidence-building measures might look like. And in that regard, the CMA was certainly a good effort to try to move the ball as far forward with North Korea as possible at the time. The events since then, first of all, North Korea is walking away from it. And then North Korea's violations of it. And North Korea's expanded development of missiles and nuclear weapons and their rhetoric directly threatening the security of the Republic of Korea certainly marginalize the value of the CMA today. I think it's regrettable that North Korea has allowed the situation on the peninsula to deteriorate to the point where we're talking about abrogating the CMA, but in no way does the actions of the Republic of Korea in response to this most recent North Korea reconnaissance satellite, in no way does that deteriorate South Korea's security. It greatly enhances it.
Mr. Lawless, so the partial suspension of CMA, was that a bare minimum defense measure, or did it put South Korea's security at risk?
No. Well, first of all, suspending the CMA, as the new defense minister has testified, in the first instance is tactical, and it was coincidental that the Gaza, the situation evolved in the Middle East. But it also and has been referenced as actually a case in point where the CMA should be suspended for tactical early warning reasons. And I think that's the case he made, that it was no longer functioning. North Korea had violated it, but for the Republic of Korea's own sovereign interests and for the interests of military defense, the CMA should be suspended and has been. So to me, agreeing with Mr. Seiler, I think that the CMA is something we can suspend, we can put it to the side. If the North Koreans come back and say, not unlike the agreed framework or something else, the North Koreans come back and say, okay, we're going to do a charm offensive again. And we want to put the CMA back into full operation. The UN government is going to say, that's fine. You have to abide by it. And you have to change everything you're doing if you want the CMA back. I believe that what's going to happen here is the North Koreans are going to use the suspension of the CMA to do some minor provocation or some other act against the Republic of Korea, and then blame that on the Republic of Korea, which is true to their form.
Mr. Seiler, some people say that South Korea should not withdraw or suspend the CMA and maintain moral upper hand above North Korea and not give reasons for North Korea to blame South Korea for anything. What are your thoughts about those ideas? Isn't security of a nation, of the populace, more important than keeping the moral upper hand?
That's a great point. I think if you look at the history of inter-Korea relations, each of these periods is marked by some thawing of relations tactically, some generation of a relatively abstract document, which not surprisingly is North Korea is going to make sure it includes everything that is advantageous to them while giving up little on their side. That's more shame on our side for accepting it, but it's relatively harmless, particularly in the spirit of trying to advance confidence building within the context of the ongoing dialogue. At a certain point, and in the past, North Korea has been very adept at ignoring agreements but not annulling them, and then putting the blame on South Korea for,
Yes.
and particularly South Korea and its alliance with the United States for not letting Koreans determine the future of Korea, for not reducing tensions, for these nuclear war game exercises. I think the era of trying to, even myself up till a few weeks ago was saying the ROK might be better to try to maneuver North Korea into a position. But guess what happened? What happened after South Korea announced its lifting of restrictions on surveillance reconnaissance? North Korea came back and annulled the whole thing. So I think the ROK played this tactically very well, and I don't have any qualms morally over, there's many ways. The armistice is a beautiful document. It has maintained relative peace and prosperity for the South and peace on the peninsula for 70 years. There are other mechanisms in the CMA to ensure tension reduction, escalation control, etc.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Mr. Lawless, Mr. Seiler, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. We'll be back here next week with U.S. experts to discuss the two Koreas and the region right here from Washington.